All right. Welcome back to I'll Read It Eventually. This is part two of a look at all the books I got video. And going to try and keep these sub 30 minutes. The last one I think is going to come in right around 25 minutes. Because again, I wonder how interesting this kind of video is. Um, I don't want my channel to be primarily this kind of video. But as I said, I do see a lot of people making these sorts of videos, and so I guess there's probably an audience for that. I've watched videos like this. I don't know what it is about that interests me, because they're not books that I have, and they're not books that the people watching have read. So I don't know what appeals about that, but yeah, I have books, and I have books to read, and I got them on the cheap, so I guess here to share. So anyway, again, these are from the International Book Project. It's a nonprofit. They had their Free Book Friday event, and so these are from that. Um, I did purchase a couple of these, but they were pretty cheap in terms of purchase price, and so um, I think per book we're talking like 50 cents or something like that. And that's the books I'm keeping for myself. If we include the books in this giant box that I put a picture of in the last video, uh, like 10 cents a book. I mean, it's nuts. So anyway, we were about halfway through the stacks last time. So the next one, not a book that I had heard of, but the title caught my eye, and then I read the back, and sounded like it would be really interesting. So this is Remembering Babylon by David Malouf. Um, I feel like I've heard his name before, um, but apparently this came out the year I was born in 1993. This is a story of a young man who is shipwrecked off Australia, and he's taken in by Aborigines. So the Aboriginal people of the continent. And then after 16 years, he moves back into European society. And sort of the question is like, who am I now? You know, like I'm a white man, but I grew up. He's 13 when he gets shipwrecked, so he's a kid. So he comes of age, he becomes a man in Aboriginal culture. And so this is a book about identity. I'm sure also in large part about race, and also what the British colonials were doing to the Aboriginal people. Which, if you know anything about the history of North America and what North American settlers did to Native Americans, then you pretty much know the story of what happens to the Aborigines. So, looked super interesting. Again, ins and outs of human relationships. That's something that really I find very interesting. So, Remembering Babylon, David Malouf. The next one, I'm not sure. Again, at an event like this, it's sort of like, well, it costs nothing. So the price of you picking it up and taking it with you is almost nothing, which is both good and bad. Um, Not sure that this is actually going to be one that I'm going to keep and read. Definitely on the fence about it. It's going to depend in large part on the first 30 pages or so. Um, but this is a book called Dead Souls by Nikolai Gogol. You can see it's a little rough on the cover there, but I don't really care about that, especially because most of the time it's going to be on the shelf like that, and the spine looks fine. And even if spines don't look fine, it doesn't matter. What matters is, can you read the book? Because that's what books are for. Anyway, um, this I'm not really sure what to make of this. It seems like it's a drama, but it also seems kind of tongue in cheek. Set in Russia in the 1840s, and there's a guy going around buying up the legal papers of Russian serfs who've died, and then trying to take out a mortgage in all of their names to buy himself like a big mansion. Um, and so I think it's sort of a social satire. Um, let's see, what does it say here? It's an enjoyable comic romp through a backward part of a backward country. Picaresque series of grotesque portraits, situations, and conversations described with Gogolian humor, based mainly on hyperbole. This is, quite simply, the funniest book in the Russian language before the 20th century. So, maybe it'll have me rolling on the floor. I don't know. Uh, I've heard the name Nikolai Gogol before, not read any of his stuff. The cover really got me on this one. I mean, who are those fellas and what are they up to? Um, Haunting my dreams, my nightmares, more like. Um, I don't know. So, yeah, not sure quite yet what to make of that. Maybe not a book you'll be hearing about again. It's also it's a Russian novel, so of course it is. What else do you have to do during the winter but write books and drink vodka? This is 472 pages, and there's no back material because the book is literally just everything in this is the text of the novel. Yeah. Wow. So that's going to be a bit of a beast. I was talking the other day about how I was thinking I was going to tackle a great Russian novel this year. Maybe that will be my great Russian novel this year. I don't know. Uh, First hardback. Um, this is John Quincy Adams' Public Life, Private Life by Paul Nagel. Um, John Quincy Adams is a really interesting guy. Obviously, the son of John Adams, the second president of the United States. Yeah. Um, John Quincy has a really interesting life. He becomes ambassador to Russia at a really young age. Spends a lot of his youth in Europe. Obviously, comes of age during the American Revolution, and so has that going on. His dad is obviously president, a debater at the Continental Congresses, and signer of the Declaration of Independence, and so on and so forth. And so he's sort of absorbing that. But then he's part of the first generation who come of age in the new republic. And so he becomes president. Was one of the last presidents of the founding era. Um, I was bookmarking this one too from Waterstone's booksellers. Um, but what's really interesting about Adams is that after his presidency, and he's, I think, the only president to ever do this, after his presidency, he runs for Congress and represents a New England district. Can't remember what state. It's probably Massachusetts. But he represents a New England district in the House of Representatives and takes as basically his primary issue ending slavery. He is a huge proponent of the abolition of the slave trade and the emancipation of people held in bondage. So, really interesting guy. And does that basically the rest of his life. Dies on well, he doesn't die on the floor of the Senate, but he falls mortally ill on the floor of the House of Representatives. Um, excuse me. Um, Advocating against the slave trade. So, really, really cool person, but also, I think, personally quite cantankerous. I mean, look at that face. It does not look like the face of somebody that you could just walk up to and start a happy conversation. He looks like he's somewhat unapproachable. Uh, Played very ably by Sir Anthony Hopkins in the great movie Amistad about the slave revolt aboard the Amistad. Some of the only African slaves to win their freedom after coming to the United States. Their case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court of the United States finds that they are free persons um, and lets them go, which is pretty cool. So, great movie. Kind of just spoiled the ending, but it's still a great movie. And Sir Anthony Hopkins. So, um, fantastic. There's a bird going wild outside my window. I don't know what he's doing. Um, So the next one is one that I had heard of. Pretty sure that students either at my school or at another school that I worked at for a short period of time had to read this as a textbook. This is Cry, the Beloved Country by Alan. I think it's Alan Paton, but it might be Alan Paton. Only one T, so I could go either way. Um, it's a novel about South Africa. The who I assume is the main character here is a pastor, a Zulu pastor, um, and this is sort of set against the racial injustice of early South Africa. 1948. Okay, so not early. 1948. Well, no, it's published in 48. I don't know when it's set. But anyway, it's about apartheid. It's about dealing with apartheid. It's about people who are local to the country being pushed off their land and suffering racial injustice. Um, and also at the same time, Christianity is an import to Africa. And so this is a guy who is a Christian himself, but is obviously also indigenous to the continent and dealing with what I assume is those two identities conflicting. So looking forward to this. Heard a lot about this, but never picked it up before. Uh, but I think it ought to be good. So yeah. Um, the next one is one that I have actually wanted to pick up for a long time, and then I couldn't pass this up because it's a Norton Critical Edition. If you don't know, Norton Critical Edition is kind of the standard for the literary study of a work. So it's not just the text of whatever the work is, but then it's also got critical reactions to it from the time period, critical reactions now. It's got contextual stuff. So if it's a historical work, it's got contextual stuff telling you what's going on around the time period. It might have maps, charts, family trees. It just depends on the book. But this is The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde, this is other than this, his most famous work is probably The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is a book about Christian redemption and damnation. And so really, really good work. Great thing to read if you're a Christian is The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's a book I really like a lot. Um, Wilde has an interesting life. This, I think, is a comedy. Yeah, comedic tour de force. So this is a comedy, I believe a romantic comedy. Wilde had a really interesting life. Um, he was sort of a adjacent, aristocrat adjacent, but a British guy in the late um, 19th century. Yeah, late 19th century. So late 1800s. And at that point in time, homosexuality was illegal in Great Britain. And there was a scandal in which it was determined that he had been romantically involved with somebody else, with another man. And so there was this salacious court case that dragged on for, I don't know for how long, a long time, about him and about what he and this other gentleman had done. And, so it ruins his public career as a writer. But he sort of flees Britain after that and ends up in France, and he dies in Paris. What's really interesting about Wilde is that a lot of his work points at or pokes at religion, and there's a huge question about his religious status himself. Um, but something that I actually find really heartening about him because he's clearly a very troubled person, um, and has obviously a very difficult life. He dies pretty young too. I think he's in his 40s. Um, but something very heartening about his story is that he actually dies a baptized Catholic. On his deathbed, he asks for last rites, and he asks for the sacrament of baptism, and was received into the Catholic Church before he died. So, um, yeah. if you read a picture of Dorian Gray, the main character in that book, there's a lot of things that sort of point to some biographical information about Wilde. It seems like maybe he's writing about himself a little bit, not straight up, but a little bit. Um, so, be an interesting person to talk to in glory. Great. Sorry about that. A little person was knocking at my door asking for juice, so couldn't say no to that. Um, Next book is a really sharp right turn away from Oscar Wilde to a totally different subject. This is John Keegan's War and Our World. Keegan's a really well known military historian. Um, where is it here? Yes, this white book right here is his book, The First World War. He's also got another book, which I may have as well. There's no way I'm going to find it quickly, called The Second World War. Um, and those are very topical works, but then he also has a number of thematic, I guess I would say, works. He's got a book called The Mask of Command, which is sort of about the weight of leadership and sort of some examples of good leadership in military history, and then a number of others. This book um, basically asks, is war natural? Right? Like, do humans naturally go to war? Is it something that our species sort of has within it as part of its being? Um, and then he gets into some other questions about whether or not war must continue. Right? So, where did it come from? Is it just part of us? And then also, can we end it, right? Or is war going to always be with us? I think this seems like it's a pamphlet or a lecture. It's really short. It's only 74 pages. Um, it is written as a book, has chapters and stuff, so not exactly sure. Um, okay, yeah, so it's the 1998 Wreath Lectures at the Royal Institution, the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. Uh, So yeah, so that Sandhurst is sort of like the West Point of the United Kingdom. So if you're not familiar with that, so um, and I'm pretty sure Keegan's British. Yeah, almost certain that he's British. So it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, he's got a couple things. First World War is really good. If you're interested in the First World War, very good history, exhaustive. So I mean, it's long and it's very detailed, but it's really good. It will tell you all the stuff you want to know. So highly recommend Keegan for that. Again, I got three more. Real sharp right turn away from that. Back to the classics. This is Joseph Conrad's The Secret Agent. And again, this is a really nice imprint. This is the Modern Library Classics. I love the way these look, especially the spine. I think is just awesome. I have a number of these. Um, Anytime I see one of these that's gettable for something that's not insane, obviously I pick it up. Um, Conrad is a great author. He's probably most well known for his book, The Heart of Darkness, which is sort of about civilized people versus barbarism and what it takes to cause someone to descend into barbarism. Um, and quite famously, that novel was the impetus for the very well known movie Apocalypse Now. Um, and even I think even most of the names in Apocalypse Now are the same. Obviously, the setting changes from equatorial West Africa to Vietnam during the Vietnam conflict, but still basically the same story. The idea of going native is kind of what's going on there. But the subtitle is The Secret Agent, A Simple Tale. It's really hard to read. Sorry about that. For you guys, I can read it fine. A simple tale, but it's the story of a double agent, pre World War One. So, um, seems like it should be really great. I think actually this one might go near the top of my reading list because I really like Conrad. I've read another of his books. Um, it's escaping me now. It's really good though. He's one of these guys who works a lot in the psychology of his characters. So there's a lot about what's going on in their heads, or seemingly what's going on in their heads. But then also he works in sort of like great reveals. There's like a moment where it's like, oh wow, like that's what that person is like. And so obviously with a double agent kind of story, that at a certain point we're gonna see what the person's really like. So looking forward to that. Conrad's really good. He's one of those classic authors that is actually pretty easy to get into, because his works are usually pretty short. This is like a Norton Critical Edition. It has a bunch of other material in it near the back. So it's only about 200 pages, which for a classic novel is not very long. So highly recommend Joseph Conrad. Any Joseph Conrad you can get. In fact, I would just wholesale recommend. Kind of like John Keegan, just wholesale recommend. Um, yeah, this next one I'm actually really excited about. I've wanted this book for a long time, but it did not have a huge print run when it came out a couple of years ago, and was consequently pretty expensive. And so I didn't get a copy then, and figured I'd pick one up used. Well, behold, this is Hero of Two Worlds, The Life of Lafayette, by Mike Duncan. Um, sorry, The Marquis de Lafayette in the Age of Revolution is the actual subtitle, but it's The Life of Marquis de Lafayette. By Mike Duncan. Mike Duncan is somebody that, if you're a podcast person, you may have heard of. He had two really successful podcast projects. He did The History of Rome, which, in my opinion, it's the greatest podcast that's ever been made. It was great. I've listened to it 2 times. There's like 200 some episodes, and it, loved every minute of it. So really, really great from that perspective. But then he also made a podcast, much shorter lived project called Revolutions, which is about major world revolutions, starting with the English Civil War in the 1640s, 1630s and 40s, and working its way all the way up to, I think, the Russian Revolution was the last season of that show. Yeah, and just sort of trying to figure out what is a revolution, what do they do, how do they change world history, that sort of thing. So, um, really excited to get into this. Lafayette's a really interesting character. Most people know that he has a role in the American Revolution. Kind of comes over as this like gentleman adventurer and serves in the Continental Army as a friend of George Washington. A lot of people are not aware that he went back to France and he basically tried to make the American Revolution happen in France. And the French Revolution takes place um, the next decade after the American Revolution, but it's got a very different character to it, um, for a lot of reasons. But one of those reasons is that, unlike America, France has a very distinct class system before its revolution. And so there's a very distinct class based nature to the revolution, right? The aristocrats are the bad guys, right? Even if they're not, which is weird because Lafayette is an aristocrat, right? Marquis, that's an aristocratic title, Marquis. He's an aristocrat, but he's a revolutionary, and so he's sort of caught between these opposing forces. And there's actually lots of different interest groups in the French Revolution, way more than in the American Revolution. And he's got all these grand ideas about how he's going to bring life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness and equality and justice to France. And then the French Revolution just descends into a bloodbath. And he's kind of left a broken man. But so, really, he's a fascinating person, but he does not see success at the end of his career. Uh, so looking forward to that. Mike Duncan's really interesting. I've got another book of his on the shelf. I can't remember what it is. It's about the Roman Republic, and is fascinating for all the reasons that I've already talked about the Romans. Last book, and then again, if you don't enjoy these sorts of episodes, you can skip the rest of them for all time. The last book is called The Barbarian Conversion from Paganism to Christianity by Richard Fletcher. And this traces the shift in Europe from primarily pagan to almost exclusively Christian between the years 627 and 1386. 627 is when England wholesale embraces Christianity. 1386 is the end date of the Northern Crusades, which is a set of little known religious wars in places like Lithuania and Latvia, the Ukraine, Belarus, against the last surviving pagan nation in Europe, which is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So really interesting. I'm certain. I've got a couple other books on my shelf behind the laptop about sort of the history of paganism in Europe, and I think that's another one of the things. So the Great Russian Novel, probably one of these ins and outs of human relationship novels. And then the history of paganism, I think, are kind of going to be the big three things I'm going to try and tackle this year, or the remainder of this year, because this year is basically half over. It's now June, which is the 6th month of a year. It's crazy. But those are sort of my priorities going forward. So very much looking forward to reading this. It's big. It's a big book, but it has quite a bit of notation and stuff in the back, so it's not actually as large as it looks. And it also has pictures, so love that. But yeah, I think that that's just a super interesting shift that takes place, because there are people, even into the Renaissance, 1386 is the Renaissance almost. There are people still worshiping pagan gods and offering animal sacrifices and all that sort of stuff. And so, um, yeah, I think that that mindset of just like your world fading away um, against like this relentless tide of some other worldview system, is fascinating. So, um, yeah, that's The Barbarian Conversion from Paganism to Christianity by Richard Fletcher. So, all that for essentially nothing from the International Book Project. So it's a great place. You should go there. You should frequent it if you're in Lexington. Really nice people there. Had several really good conversations. And they told me that their next Free Book Friday is on August the 28th. So um, perhaps I will see someone who's a viewer there. That'd be exciting. Do say hello if you run into me. You'll know what I look like. Probably not vice versa. So, yeah. I don't know about you. I'm going to go read one of these books. Why don't you do the same?